Good morning to everybody. Good morning to those of you who are intrepid enough and stalwart enough and brave enough to be here at 8 after a long break here. So today we're going to talk about AI in writing, but before we do that, I've got a few things in advance. So here's what we're going to do today. We've got our usual AI and news thing. We will do team forming. I noticed that most people have got their teams made, so that's great. Anybody who's left off, we'll handle that at the end. And then we'll talk about AI in writing with sort of by special video performance, a good friend of mine, Stephen Johnson. So let's get right into it. This is where we're at right now in terms of the class. So this is the 19th class out of 27. You will be doing this last two classes. So I'm really only on the hook for another few classes. And so I'm looking forward to all of your final presentations, and we'll talk some more about that at the very end. Okay, so today's AI in writing. Tomorrow we'll be thinking about AI, art, and music, primarily sound synthesis. And then we'll talk about creativity next week, and then the one after that will be about image synthesis. So if you've been waiting to figure out how to use, DALL-E 3 or something, wait till then, okay? So that's the plan right now. I did want to point out there are two readings for tomorrow's class. If you can, please check them out tonight. They're really worth checking out. David Stork has been in the field for a long time, and he's got, I think, a pretty wise piece about where computer vision, machine learning, and all that is going. In this case, in the study of art, which is sort of an interesting analytic, not a generative AI application. And then you can read Pamela Samuelson's piece about AI copyright issues. It will not be exactly the same as Europe, but it's pretty close, and it brings up all the same fundamental issues. So it's worth looking at both of those. Okay, let's get into it. Our typical header, AI news you can use. And as usual, this is from just a couple days ago. So every week I have my feelers out and I kind of watch for the latest and greatest stuff that's happening. And this came out in the Wall Street Journal just a little while ago. And it's about Meta providing digital companions so that you can chat with them, chatbots basically, that take on specific personas. And I know this is very, very commonplace. You can, for example, there's a big company in Korea that offers Hollywood stars you can chat to. Here, talk to Brad Pitt. And so I know people who are over there training these things. And they have licenses. But Meta has done something completely questionable, I guess. So I want you to be thinking about this with your AI ethics hat on. Because it's easy to build a chatbot, you know that now, right? And so the question is, as this report finds out, it's pretty simple to get ones that are theoretically validated for younger users to speak things that you may not want them to be talking about. So guardrails? Well, it's pretty apparent that Meta has decided that that's not important right now. It's more important to get eyeballs and people logged in and signed up. So you probably saw, it was last month, there was a new book about Facebook called Careless People, and it's all about people just not paying attention. And that seems to be right from Mark Zuckerberg on down. So it's a huge problem, I think. So this is going to, I think, cause a lot of regulation to happen here, both in Europe and the US. So I also, just for contrast, I did an interesting thing this weekend. I just asked ChatGPT and Gemini and a DeepSeek and all your favorite large language models. Sports questions. I thought, how interesting. It's spring, we're all going to be outside playing football or doing whatever. So I asked ChatGPT in this case, what are the player positions on a baseball field for American baseball, right? And it gave me a very nice answer. There are 9 positions, right? And it gives the description of each, what they do, and their symbols. And then at the very end it says, would you also like a quick diagram showing where they are? I said, sure, that would be lovely. Show me the diagram. And it created this. This is crazy. This is crazy. A, there are 12 people on the field. 3 of them have bats. And even in cricket, you don't get three batters. Right? You just don't get three batters. And so I don't know where this comes from. It's whacked. It's completely whacked. And it's so interesting because we'll talk about image generation in just a little bit. And you know from your experience of the assignment with the invitation, right, how hard this is and how things have changed recently. However, it has not yet made it to making diagrams. And so I thought, well, that was interesting. So I asked about football. I don't know about you. That doesn't look like any pitch I've ever seen, right? And nor are those real people or real positions. And this guy has two balls? I mean, what? What's the story here? Or American football, again, completely insane, and none of the text makes any sense. So it kind of goes on and on from there. So and then just this morning, as I was coming into work this morning, I got this notification about this article that appeared in Wired yesterday. The title is, "A Philosopher Released an Acclaimed Book About Digital Manipulation." And turns out he had an AI write the book. Not a surprise, but he released it under a fake person's name. So this person does not exist. We know it's easy to make personas, right? We can generate images like this. This is a totally fake guy. So when asked, the translator, Andrea Colomedici, when asked what's going on, he said, oh, it's a philosophical performance. Like, okay. You wrote a book with AI, created a fake author, and then passed it off. And it was acclaimed in the European press as an important book about philosophy. The fact that it's complete BS is just sort of beyond everybody, right? So, interesting question. But I did find this, when he was interviewed by Wired, he said, working with my students, I realized that they were using ChatGPT in the worst possible way to copy from it. I observed that they were losing an understanding of life by relying on AI, which is alarming because we live in an era where we have access to an ocean of knowledge, but we don't know what to do with it. So I don't approve of his method here, but that's a really good point, right? It's a little bit like me when I'm grading your assignments. I know that some of it is written by ChatGPT, and I want to give it a 9 out of 10, but I also want to write, but only if it's a real person behind the text, right? So we're going to talk about writing in AI today. And we're going to talk about it both from an ethical perspective, from a technical perspective, and a pragmatic perspective. And I thought, what better way to do this than to start off with a little bit of background. So the bigger question is, we're all actively engaged in writing. I'm working on a new book, and it's really interesting to use AI to help me brainstorm ideas. And the bigger question is, what can we do that's effective and ethical? So here's a little background. Remember spell check? Right. So spell check, when we first started it a few years ago, was basically this very simple thing. We look at words and then say, here's a better word, here's a substitution. So the user interface for that was to do a little pop-up. Here's the substitution for that. Here's a piece of writing on the word level to do a substitution, and you can accept it or change it, whatever, right? So that's the interface. You've all seen that. You can also do this. For example, this is a novel word, and when it sees that, it can say, we can either gives advice, either you can change the word or I can add it to the dictionary. That I can change my training to incorporate this word. And that's a word used inside of Google. That's the code name for the spreadsheet program. Okay. Google suggestions, that is, the pull-down menu when you start typing, that's a kind of writing. Here's a bunch of suggestions of things you could be typing at this point, right? This is derived from all of the other 1 million queries that people have done, and this is the head of that query statement. So that's pretty simple. You can implement that. And then there's this kind of example, which is giving you suggestions. So here the user interface is to give you gray text and say, if you want it, just hit tab. It doesn't say tab anywhere on there, but you know tab means accept, right? Or go to the next option. So that's pretty straightforward as well, because it's just doing sentential or sentence level completions of the words based on the sequence you've already given it. Does that sound familiar? Sounds all like, ChatGPT or any one of these things. Now, back in 2022, which isn't that long ago, this is sort of the dawn. This is just before ChatGPT first version came out. So I was at Google, and we were working on these various kinds of large language model things. And we released a thing called the AI Test Kitchen using the Lambda language model. And we were trying to figure out how people would think about this. Do you remember Wizard of Oz? This is not quite Wizard of Oz studies, but what we did, one of the studies we ran is what I call Dan's study class method, which is actually very straightforward. We bring in a bunch of people just like this. We give them a piece of software, we put it on their phones, and they start using it. And then we have TAs, that is software engineers and people who do UX research on the project. The TAs would then help out, and they would take notes. So this is actually a really effective way to get a lot of information very, very quickly about the usability of a particular piece of software. So it's not heuristic evaluation, it's not normal putting in the lab, but you get a bunch of people, and if you run the study class method right, what you get is people talking to each other. And they show each other things. Did you know you could do this? That kind of thing. And that turns out to be a really powerful way to learn stuff about your system. I'll give you an example of that. I did one study class where it was right when Android, what was it? It was, It was right after Android operating system was released. And I ran a study class on how to use Android on your phone. Okay? So we've got 30 people like we've got here. We all had devices, and we all were using Android. And one of the things that I was teaching was how to use the hot word activation. So you would say, hey Google, or hey Siri, or whatever, hot word activation. It's a classic AI technique. And so the way it works is that there's a little process sitting there basically listening for one word. That's all it does. It has a record buffer of like 2 seconds, and then just spins over that, it looks for the hot word. And when the hot word is said, then it brings up, it responds and says, hi, how can I help you, or something, right? So we were testing that, and I was teaching, say, here's how you do it. Say, hey, Google, right? And one of the things we noticed is that in a class like this, we had 30 people, half of you, it didn't work. Did not work. That's kind of interesting, so I took a little note. We discovered a bunch of stuff. So this study class method, really cheap, really easy to do, and you learn all kinds of stuff. So I took that observation back to the engineers and said, hey engineers, this is a big meeting of the engineering staff, there's like 50 people in the room. Hey engineers, do you know your hot word activation function doesn't work half the time? They said, what? No, it's ridiculous. We have the logs, Dan. We know it works 99.9% of the time. I said, okay, engineers, pull out your phone, let's try it. Now this is taking a risk on my part because I know you guys, the engineering staff, have the latest build, the latest best hardware, and you're very skilled, you're very talented, right? So it's the best of the best of the best, right? I said, let's try it. Try it once and then raise your phone if it worked. I was very happy to see that of 50 engineers, 25 people raised their hands. The other 25 didn't work. Didn't work. Why didn't they know this? Because the logs, remember the logs? The logs don't record stuff that doesn't happen. A non-event never gets logged because it's on the device. It's the process sitting on the Android phone listening for the magic word. So if nothing happens, nothing's logged, right? So they were surprised, and to their credit, they went out and fixed it. So now the actual completion rate is much higher. It works pretty well. But that's the kind of thing you can discover. And in this case, we discovered that people were using this system. This is the earliest version of an automatic AI writing system that I know about. And this is a silly example about it creating text about a black hole. But when people were using it to ask questions about what beaches they should go to on their holiday, they would get back answers that were often hallucinated. So that was the first time I'd seen hallucinations. But the interesting observation was that people would look at that written text and go, oh yeah, I'm going to go there. Sounds great, right? So it was the first time I'd seen people doing that high trust from fluent text, even though it was hallucinated. So this is in 2022. So now, flash forward a year, ChatGPT comes out, and people start writing at the end of the year about the 10 best AI writing tools. Now this is from a couple days ago. People are still writing those articles, right? So what's happened is that as the underlying AI technology has become democratized, as it becomes simpler and simpler to build your own writing tool application, people are starting to do all kinds of things. Lots of different things have happened, and there's always the 10 best, and that set changes from time to time. So I was going to show you a couple of these, but I wanted to point out that this is now just a common thing. So one of them is a system that's called Notion. Does anybody use Notion? Okay. Do you actually use it, or you just played with it once? Okay, you play with it. That's totally fine. I've only ever played with it too. I end up spending a fair bit of money every year just playing with something, get an initial, and I recommend you do this too. If you're to be a professional in this, you sort of need to stay on top of it. You're going to have to invest a little bit of money. Think of it as tuition, right? Think of it as buying books or buying whatever. But so I played with it for a little bit. I'm going to show you a short video. So Notion AI came out in early 2023. And let's watch a little bit of this video. This is their demo video.
Today, we're introducing Notion AI, which brings the power of artificial intelligence directly into your Notion workspace. Let's say we're writing a blog post to introduce Notion AI.
It should all look familiar.
It's as simple
to you, right?
as asking AI Assist for help and clicking Generate Post. Next, just sit back and watch as artificial intelligence completes your first draft. Notion AI is also super talented at helping you brainstorm whenever you get stuck.
Note here, what they did is they have a slash command. So their interface includes special command bracketing. People don't do that much anymore, right? But that was a early notion here.
Let's brainstorm ideas for promoting our new feature. Looks great. Notion AI likes to think big, but it's also good at smaller things, like fixing spelling and grammar. Perfect. Need help with translation? Watch Notion AI translate in real time.
Although what they've got is an
Magic.
interface that allows you to surface.
The truth is,
tasks.
sometimes we all just get stuck.
So
And in those
specialized
cases,
prompts
Notion AI can
around
help
each
you
one.
write. Just ask it. Okay, a little bit bold, but we'll take it.
Okay, that's right. Got it. So it's basically an AI assisting tool that has different buckets and different ways to do specific task support. Yeah, thank you. So if you ask a question like, how do I use GDT, getting things done, right? The GDT idea, it will give you this very nice list, and you should have seen things like this. You can get this from ChatGPT or Gemini or any of these. Okay. Now, what I want to show you are a couple of things, thinking about AI writing tools from a human-computer interaction perspective. So I'm going to show you three things real quick. These are all articles. So this is worth knowing that this is from 2019. 2019, an infinitely long period ago in the internet age. But the thing to notice down here is that in the US, AI writing tools in 2019 were being used to write lots and lots of sports stories. So the football story about, this guy scored this goal at this minute, blah, 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 AI generated, right? They don't tell you that, but I will tell you that that's what's happening. A lot of this, especially like baseball stories or soccer/football stories in the U.S. are done that way. There was this article about using AI to create recipes. The bottom line here is, think about how large language models work. They string together most probable sequences, right, of words and those prediction. And what you'll get is not great recipes, because it doesn't have a taste model. So it will say things like, well, you should make a sauce for your chicken using peanut butter and wasabi. Don't try it. Terrible, right? So interesting thing is you can do this kind of thing. You can actually build a specialized AI tool to do that. But be cautious about that. And then there's Kevin Roos, who is a New York Times tech columnist. I'm telling you, this is personal opinion, I don't think he's great. He ends up getting a lot of things wrong about technology, about AI in particular. But he wrote this interesting review of a book about AI, which is this book here, Age of AI, by Kissinger, Schmidt, and Huttenlocher. And I was curious about this book because I've worked with both Eric Schmidt and with Daniel Huttenlocher. Never worked with Henry Kissinger. But it's one of these things I thought, well, it'd be interesting to see how he uses an AI system to help do this. And so he ends up saying, I'm going to use ChatGPT to help me write this review, and it does a reasonable job. It's not brilliant, but it's okay. Okay, you can do this, right? You know you can do this. So I bring this all up by way of saying that there are uses for AI help in writing. And what I thought I would do today is introduce Stephen Johnson. And I'm going to show you a video of him speaking to the previous iteration of this class at Stanford. So I've known Stephen for a while. He's an author of more books than I ever can dream of writing. So these are, I think he's written like 20 books at this point. Imagine that, 20 books. That's a lot of writing. So he's a real master of writing. He also joined Google to help out with the Notebook LM project. And what you'll see here is him discussing an article, which is this article here. I guess I should bring it up. This is his article by Stephen Johnson about using AI to help write stories, help writing stuff. So it's interesting article. I recommend this to you. You've got the slides, you can check it out. But what I want to show you here is, he wrote, for example, this book called The Ghost Map. Has anybody read this book? You haven't read it? It's worth reading. Not just because he's my friend, but because it tells the story of the first use of InfoViz to help solve a medical problem. So in London, a Victorian era, there was this problem with cholera. It was spreading throughout a neighborhood. Nobody knew why. I'm telling you the whole book in short form. He basically figured out, Dr. John Snow figured out, if he drew a map of all the cases where cholera was on the map of London, they were all in one little tiny neighborhood. And they were centered on a water pump, which turned out to be, an active source of cholera. So the fix was to take the handle off the water pump. Cholera goes to zero. Pissed people off because they couldn't get water anymore, right? They had to walk a mile to get water. But the point was, it was a great insight in how to use InfoViz to debug a medical problem. Okay, so he wrote that book. I was impressed. We talked. And so what I'm going to do here is actually do two things. See if I can pull this off. I want to view, let's go to, this is the video. I'll put that up here. You can see, that's Peter right here, Peter Norvig. And this is my Stanford class. And let's go back to my slides. And the reason I'm doing this is so we can both watch the video and they're in different windows. Okay, I got to get them into the same. workspace. There we go. So now I'm going to let this video run, and I open with a question with Stephen, asking Stephen about why he wrote this article. So Stephen, I'm super curious, just to get this thing kicked off, what led you to write that story? How did you end up doing that?
Yeah, so, my interest in using kind of smart software to help you with your writing and your thinking is something that I've been actively working on, writing about, and using as a writer and a researcher for 20 years or so. And there was a program that is still around, actually, called DevonThink, that I used for many years, including that I used for writing Ghost Map, that book about cholera that you mentioned, Dan. And DevonThink was this tool where basically I loaded it up with all the quotes from books that I had read in kind of research mode, or articles. And this was back before the Kindle and before, just in the kind of early days of the web. So some of these were like print books that I had to kind of like type in by hand when I found a passage that I thought was interesting. But basically I assembled a collection of like 1,000 or 2,000 passages from books over 10 years of reading. And DevonThink had this kind of early, it wasn't really AI, it certainly wasn't a language model, but it was a kind of semantic engine that let you make connections between blocks of text. And so you could write a block of text, or you could read a block of text, and you could say, hey, DevonThink, show me things that are like this in my reading history.
So what he's done basically is made a big collection, and it does semantic analysis. So old school AI, not the modern large language models, to allow you to find connections between texts.
And it would surface, 10 potential quotes. And so I would use it as a almost like a kind of intellectual like sparring partner, where I would write something and then I would be like, well, I'm sure there's something I've read over the last 5 or 6 years that I'm forgetting here that might be relevant to this. And so I would ask DevonThink for kind of recommendations. And when I was writing Ghost Map, I had I was writing about that book is about cholera and about the London sewer system. And so I was writing a lot about waste recycling, basically. And so I had a passage about waste recycling. It was literally about like human waste recycling. And DevonThink conjured up this passage from a book I'd read like 6 years before about how evolution over time took the waste byproducts of calcium, and that evolved into skeletons, basically, our bones are kind of like, an acceptation of a waste byproduct of cell metabolism. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Oh,
Let's go quick comment there. Acceptation, he used that word. Anybody know what it means? It means to take a design feature and reuse it for something else. In this case, calcium, which is a waste byproduct of animals, was accepted, not adapted, but accepted, used to make bones, used in a really different mechanism, for a different mechanism, using the same underlying technology, if you will.
Maybe I could write a little bit about the connection between cities and cells and how they manage waste and everything. And I went off and ended up writing like 5 pages in the book on this little riff. And when I stepped back and thought about it, I was like, who had that idea, right? Like I would not have thought of that without the help of this software. But on the other hand, I was feeding the software quotes, pre-filtering it, giving it lots of things to kind of work with. And I was the only, of the two of us, I was the only one who could actually write 5 pages about it. But it felt for the first time like there was this kind of duet happening between me and the software in my work. And
I want to point this out because you're seeing real collaboration between him and the piece of software, early AI software that he was using. And that's an important motif that we'll keep seeing again and again.
That kind of like planted a seed in my mind that I've been kind of exploring ever since. And then I started to hear a little bit about the predecessor of GPT-3, GPT-2, which was really not very good. But Dan, you mentioned autocomplete. There's a great New Yorker article that I think John Seabrook wrote about autocomplete and GPT-2. And he tells this story about writing an email to his son. and he's writing some kind of like, his son's off at college, and he's writing some email just about like plane tickets or whatever, and it's not, very emotional. But he gets to the end of the email, and he types, he starts to say, like, I'll see you later, and he types I, and the autocomplete says, I'm very proud of you. And he's like, oh, that's a great thing. I should. When was the last time I told him I was proud of him? That's fantastic. And so, hits return, and then he's like, wait, what just happened? Like,
Yeah.
Google autocomplete just figured out like that I was missing some emotional nuance with my son, giving me this little nut to be more connected to him and remind him how proud I am. And like, that's a very weird moment that this is happening, right? So we started to get into this kind of like uncanny area, and then GPT-3 came out. And honestly, when I first pitched that story to the Times Magazine, I was really interested in the organizational structure of OpenAI, the company that were originally nonprofit organization, now this kind of hybrid. And so I originally said, like, look, a lot of people have written about GPT-3, but I'd like to write more about this new hybrid organization, which is pretty interesting as well. And then it was hard to get access to GPT-3 at that point. And then I got access to it in reporting the story and was like, oh, I mean, I'll write a little bit about the organizational structure, but like, this software is so, momentous in its implications that I need to spend like 8,000 words talking about like what it's doing with language. And so that's how I got to that piece.
So one quick question or an observation is that when Google search first introduced autocomplete in the searches as you're typing, and a set of suggestions that pop up below it, we did this analysis to see how much difference there was before versus after. Mm-hmm. So we were worried that we would be guiding people down paths that they didn't really want to go down, and we were suggesting shiny clickbaity things to click on. And in fact, I did the analysis, and one of the things that was striking to me about it is that the change in the queries was very, very, very small. Mm-hmm. What did happen was it sped up the interaction cycle because people didn't have to type so much. Now, you and I touch type, so we're very fast at it, but a lot of people in the world are not. Right. And so the dominant change was to recognize that just typing was an impediment to people. And so all of a sudden, we allowed them to switch and opt out of that, basically. But you bring up an interesting point. If you're being guided in this way, as you write, how much of the authorship is yours versus some weird melded mind kind of Vulcan thing? How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's really pretty fascinating. And when autocomplete, and there are a lot of tools. Notion is doing this, and many people building on top of OpenAI's APIs are doing this, where it's kind of like, you write the first 3 sentences and then you let the AI write the next 3. And, there's a real question of like, who is the author of that paragraph then? Right. And when I was doing the Times piece, I really spent a lot of time. Every time I had GPT-3 generate something, I would go through and do like an exact search in Google to confirm that like this configuration of words has never been put together in this exact formation before. So it's generating original prose. So just on a like logistical level, if you think it can get a certain level of quality, it just breaks every plagiarism detector in the world, right? Like it's generating new phrases that have never been formulated before. So there's like just this kind of academic ethics side of it that's a question. The other element of it is I'm very intrigued with this idea of not having it generate prose on its own, because there are a lot of reliability problems there, and there's some ethical issues there as a journalist or as a student potentially. And we'll get to some of those in a second. I have a funny thing to show. But the thing that I kind of find as a writer that I often want is you get stuck in certain syntactical ways of organizing your sentences, or certain words. You're like, oh my gosh, I always use the word momentous or whatever it is, and there's certain just kind of sentence structures that your brain just kind of gravitates towards. And so as a writer, a lot of what I do in an edit mode is like make my sentences more interesting. where I'm really not changing the content of them. I'm just trying to figure out how to change the rhythm of this or bring in a slightly more like vivid set of phrases that make it more kind of fun to read. And it does occur to me that that's an interesting mode where it's almost like the way I've been describing it is like a paragraph level thesaurus. So instead of being like, oh, I've got this one word momentous and I want to see a bunch of other options for it so I can not repeat myself, I've got this whole paragraph. I would like to see 5 versions of this paragraph with the exact same meaning, but just different sentence structure and different word choices and different rhythm to it. Maybe even trained in the style of other authors. Like, what would this look like if Orwell wrote it? Keep my ideas intact, but just like play with the styles. And I think that's a pretty interesting. That one, the models can do this. Like, that is something that they can do now. And you're not asking them for facts about the world. You're giving them the facts. You're just asking them to kind of riff on stylistic.
So I want to point out, this is a powerful idea. Next, tomorrow, I guess we're going to talk about what's called tone transfer or style transfer, and he's mentioning this, where you take this writing style of a particular author and then apply it to your own work. He mentioned Orwell. He's got a really great example coming up. So that brings up an interesting point, which is these language models can now be trained in the style of, right? So that you don't just take a raw model, but I can say, let me annotate you in the following way by uploading, say, all of your books or all of my writing or something like that. So your point is well taken. I can actually then say, rewrite this in the style of Orwell or Sinclair or Mark Twain. What would that be like? Imagine Stephen Johnson as seen through the lens of Mark Twain. Interesting thought. But to what extent does that change the way you think about it? Because a human editor does this too.
Yeah.
Isn't it always a duet between you and your editor?
Yeah, but there's a lot that happens just alone at the word processor, right? That there's a lot of like rewriting before you even get to the editor phase. And so having someone else, some other thing that's there, like just nudging you and saying like, hey, you could write that sentence a little differently, or what about if you did it this way? I'm pretty open to that as something that I would use as a writer if it is indeed determined that is an ethical way to use AI. But it gets to a broader point about AI that I think is pretty fascinating. And this is particularly true with things like Stable Diffusion and DALL-E, the text to image models, is how enormously sophisticated they are at replicating style. So your ability to say like, hey, I want to see a video game arcade, but painted in the style of Rembrandt. And it's just able to like figure out a way to like assimilate whatever it is about Rembrandt that makes us go like, oh yeah, that's a Rembrandt, but paint a completely new painting, of objects that Rembrandt never painted. So the ability to kind of like detect and replicate style, I think that's very surprising. Like that, I think that we wouldn't have predicted that 5 or 10 years ago. Like we would have been like, oh, it'll be able to identify that that's a dog in the picture, and it will be able to like create an image of a dog, maybe if we're being really adventurous.
And that's really true.
That it would be able
I had
to, like,
no idea.
An image of a dog in the style of like Picasso's Cubist period, which it just can. Like that, I think is really quite remarkable, and I don't think enough has been. I don't have a big theory about it except to say that it's surprising how good it is at that kind of. That seems like a very high level form of human aesthetic understanding.
This might be a good point to cut to your slide. Should
Sure.
we show that?
Yeah.
I have to figure out how to escape from my view mode here.
A little backstory on this, but
Yeah, that's fine. So while I'm switching here, you can tell the backstory.
So I started experimenting with this idea of, could I train an AI on my own prose style? And if I did that, what would happen? And so what I did was I engineered a bunch of prompts where I took passages from a book that I'm currently writing. So this is relevant to what you're about to see.
We're doing the slide now. Can you see the slide?
No, I can't actually, but it's probably okay. Are you just seeing the first part of it?
Yes, we're just seeing my prose part.
Okay, yeah. So it wouldn't be bad to see it actually, because then I could, it's easy, but.
Can I share my screen back to you?
Oh, well, whatever. And I split them in two. And so basically I said, okay, here's part one of the paragraph, and I would cut it right in the middle of a sentence, like add a ... And the training was, here's part one of the paragraph, ... And I want a response that looks like this, part two, and I would paste in my own words. So this is just like prompt engineering, prompt training. And I would do that 2 or 3 times with a complete sentence that I had written, complete paragraph that I had written. And then I took the first half of a paragraph that I had written, and then I said, okay, finish the paragraph for me in my own style. And so if you see, the first paragraph there is about Alfred Nobel inventing dynamite, and he realized that he was solving an industrial problem, but he didn't realize that he was going to empower all these radicals to like blow up politicians. And so dynamite became more than ... And then, did you go to the second screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So then the software picks it up, a tool of political terror. It became a symbol of political terror. And then, quote, dynamite has become for us the symbol of revolutionary justice, one Russian anarchist wrote in an 1891 letter. With the first detonation, we shall destroy the state and all its institutions, and this will be the signal for the people to rise. The letter was sent to a friend in England, who dutifully turned it over to the police. The recipient, who was on the police payroll, turned out to be a double agent. And the guy who was arrested was Prince Peter Kropotkin, who had been born into the aristocracy, yada, 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 yada. Okay, so I read this, and honestly, the words out of my mouth were, holy shit. Because Kropotkin is a major figure in my book, although I have not mentioned him at all. Like, the software had no idea that Kropotkin was there. It was not in the prompt, in any of the prompts that I was using. So Kropotkin is a huge part of this. The tone of this is exactly my tone. This sounds like, exactly the kind of sentences that I would write. And it tells a little story that I didn't know about Kropotkin getting arrested because of a letter that he wrote about dynamite, which is one of the key themes. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is totally extraordinary. Like, it has just really generated not just like the style of my writing, but like it's given me this amazing new piece of content. And then I looked it up, and that entire bit from the beginning of that letter, quote, to Kropotkin getting arrested is entirely made up. So it's really like, it's fascinating because it has learned the ability to fake a sophistication that is really uncanny. Like, I don't know, it's hard to write the books that I write. Like, it took me a lot of years to like learn how to write in this way and to weave together stories like this and to connect people. And, and so like that it got like 2 or 3 examples of the way that I write. And then it was just off to the races, writing and stuff that I would have completely assumed was my original prose if I hadn't, known better. But it also is just a fabulist. I mean, it's just hallucinating these facts. And I think that's the weird place we are in right now in terms of, AI and writing, is both these tools of like, really remarkable power that, the most powerful computer in the world could not do anything like this 3 years ago. And now they're, soon to be like, smartphone apps that can do this for you, maybe talking to larger computers. But at the same time, it is not yet anchored in truth. And that is right now, that's a fatal flaw.
So one of the things that strikes me about this is, unless you're very careful about tracking what you have written, it might be very easy in, say, a year or two after you've forgotten having, quote, written this, that you might think you had written this. I don't know about you, but I've found, using a search engine, articles that I have written, say, 5 or 6 years ago, I had no idea. I don't remember this at all. And I thought, oh, what clever prose. And unless you track it, it would be easy to be misled in a funny way. But this makes me think of a couple things. First off, Bob Dylan famously had to apologize this past week for exactly reproducing his signature on books that he was selling or giving away or something. He apologized for using the auto pen tool, which amplifies his ability to duplicate his signature with ink on a book, but it wasn't original enough in some way. So that's an interesting story. And then, of course, Jumi Bello also had to apologize for not just plagiarizing content of a book, but plagiarizing the apology, which is sort of a meta plagiarism problem. But we can see, how this is going to go. But talk to me.
And I'm sure you guys are talking about this at other points in the court, but the other big concern here is that there is some kind of, in an online discussion forum, there is a Turing test that is being passed here by these things. And if you were trying to auto-generate 1 million, posts on social media that argued for whatever, some crazy theory about Tony Fauci and vaccines, you could now do it in a way that, each one would be slightly different, and it would be very hard to tell that a human hadn't written it. And that's where we are now. Like whether it's only going to get better or worse, depending on how you consider that. And so it's tricky enough thinking about these tools as an author, where you are trying as hard as you can to stick to the facts and be truthful and to more or less write in your own words. But if you have no interest in that, and all you want to do is just make sure that you get as many words into circulation that are making whatever fanciful point you want to make, that we now have superpowers that we didn't have 2 or 3 years for doing that.
So this brings us naturally to the story of Galactica. Do you understand why it was withdrawn? I mean, maybe you should describe what Galactica is. And
it came and went so quickly that I didn't get a chance to.
I'm going to skip forward a bit because I'll tell you that story. I don't want him to tell it to you. So I'm going to skip forward to...
Every time you type in a prompt to one of these systems, it magically appends a giant ethical directory of things to do, right? In the same way, for example, when you give some of these systems directions, a question like, what's the result of this mathematical expression? If you prompt it with show your work, it will tend to give you more accurate answers. So could there be an ethical prompt that would solve this problem?
Well, there's some of that at the end of the Times Magazine piece, because OpenAI had published some work on, I think they actually called it Palms, as I recall, even though Palm is also the Google language model, just ripping Google off. But anyway, it had the acronym, you all maybe read the piece more recently than I have, but it had an acronym, something like, aligning the model with society value, social values, or something like that. And the idea was that you could, there were certain prompts that would elicit these offensive statements, but if you tuned it by kind of giving it many, many examples of socially appropriate statements, it would learn, in a sense, a sense of discretion, or a sense of appropriateness, or a sense of not being, racist. And it was just an interesting point, because then you're like, okay, so, we really haven't had to teach our computers like ethics and values before. And it raises a really important issue of like, who decides what values are appropriate in these machines? If we're going to use them more and more, who is it just the people at OpenAI and at Facebook and at Google? Is that their whatever values they decide are kind of universal values, that's what are going to go into the models? It's basically a version of the content moderation debate that we've had in social media, where it's like, who decides what is offensive speech that gets you kicked off of Twitter? It used to be there was this content moderation panel, now it's Elon Musk. But that's probably not the best way to do it. But now we're going to have that same sort of question with AI, and that is, that's not about like deciding what people are allowed to say and whether they should be booted off a service, but actually trying to decide like what the values of the software itself should be. That's a whole new stage. And in a way, like, part of what I was trying to do in that piece was to say there had been a big debate, and there still is a big debate, about whether these new, foundation models, as they're sometimes called, are going to eventually lead to artificial general intelligence or maybe super intelligence, and where we have intelligence that is flexible and fluid and can adapt like new behaviors and solve problems on a complex level. All the stuff that is well out there, not in the present, but whether this was an important step towards that. And some people are like, no, we'll never get there. We're going to have a totally different approach. And some people are like, no, this is the beginning of something. But part of what I was trying to write in that piece is you don't even have to care about that issue for you to realize that something really significant happened in the last 2 or 3 years with both the text models and the image models that are going to generate a whole host of opportunities, but also ethical challenges. Even if they never lead to AGI, even if AGI never happens, right, there's still something genuinely new here. Once the machines can really traffic in meaning and language.
Okay, I'm going to stop there and pop back to my slides. So the bottom highlighted thing there, that's completely messed up. I mean, it's completely hallucinated. And very recently, like last week, while you were all off in Spain or Portugal or having a good time, I was sitting here working, and ChatGPT hallucinated a reference, a citation for something I was writing. And I thought, oh, this is perfect. This is the perfect reference. And I wasted an hour trying to find that reference before concluding that it doesn't exist. It had the author's name, well-known author, writing on a topic that I know he wrote about in a journal that's well-known, with page numbers that don't exist, with a year that was 2022. So it looked so good, and I wasted a solid hour. Let that be a lesson to you, right? You have to check these things. The other story it's worth telling about this is we'll get to this in a minute, but you can have summaries created of your writing. So you drop in say a book or a chapter or something like that, and have it say, create a summary for me. So I did that recently with a bunch of stuff I was working on, because I'm also working on another book about the unanticipated consequences of technology. And I said, summarize this. And it did so. And it wrote a better summary than I had written. It's like, dang it. Can I just steal this? And the answer is no, you cannot, right? But I think, well, let me go 2 more slides, and we'll take our quick break. So there's a bunch of stuff going on with new ways of putting AI into different kinds of tools. So as you know, AI has basically shoved, at Microsoft, they both shoved AI hooks into every possible product. So Bing and Google Search both obviously have that. But so do, for example, Photoshop, so does Google Docs, Google Sheets, so on and so on. So you can go and you can say, just help me write, and actually do something like that. And it will then generate that for you. You don't have to leave and go to a specific OpenAI chatbot or something. You can actually have it right there in context. So, which is kind of handy, because then you can say, summarize the work that's going on in this area. It will give you this thing. This is really, really marvelous integration. On the other hand, note this down here. Creative writing aid, not intended to be factual. Keep that in mind. One other thing, just to riff on, or a second on what Stephen said, is the ability to rewrite. So take my paragraph here and rewrite it in the style of, say, Goethe or Charles Darwin or whatever. One of the things that I found recently that just stunned me is you can take a poem, say Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll, take that poem and say, okay, ChatGPT, rewrite this into German, keeping the prosody and the sound similar as possible. It does a decent job. Not perfect, but it's amazing. And there's a book called The Siberiad by Stanislaw Lem, the famous Polish science fiction author, where there's a piece in it where the arch enemy tries to break the guy's computer by saying, write a poem, write a sonnet, where every word begins with the letter S. 17 lines, ends with a couplet. Go. And the arch enemy was thinking that would break the guy's computer. Of course, it generated it completely. So naturally, when the first version of ChatGPT came available, I copied that sentence out of Lem and pasted it into ChatGPT and gave it to it, and did it. It completely did it. So the ability here is completely remarkable. Be careful with your use. Okay, let's take our 5-minute break right now. Come back at 9, and we'll go to the next slide. Okay, everyone, let's get back to this. So, as I said, these things are being put into all of these tools, and you've got these hooks. Now, from our perspective, we're trying to be UX researchers, designers, product managers, whatever, and you've got this kind of interface. So I've now generated this summary. That's cool. And you've got, so designer, you just added this, right? Right? Thumbs up, thumbs down. UX researcher, how do you analyze that data? Think about that, right? Third thing, when you click on this refine button right here, see that? You refine button, it pops up a set of options. Question, how many options should there be? Do you want to add another option? What would that option be? Any ideas? Ideate. Make up something.
Maybe styles?
Style? Like, rewrite this in the style of
Some author. Or
Hemingway, whatever, right? Yeah. It's a great idea. Anybody else? There's formalize, shorten, elaborate. Oops. Rephrase. Yes.
Maybe like a simplification, so like use a simple language or something.
Oh, simplify. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So there's shorten, but then there's simplify. Two different things. Yeah.
And tones?
Hmm?
Tones?
Hmm?
Different tones.
Tones, of course. Of course. Make it more aggressive, right? Or friendly. So that actually is an option. I've seen that is an option for some of these. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to come back to this slide. We'll do this at the very end. So, because it could take an unbounded amount of time, but we're going to try this out. So Galactica, Stephen mentioned that in his talk. So Galactica was an AI writing system that would theoretically help people write new scientific papers. Those are specifically targeted to be a scholarly aid. And it was built by Meta, and it lasted for 3 days. What happened? Well, what happened was they had said, remember we talked about framing? They framed this model as doing reasoning. They would do reasoning over the space of the scientific literature. So roughly what Google Scholar does. So they poured in all this literature that they found. I won't say where they found it, but they found it, right? But they found it and said it would reason over that, and then they found that the reasoning was often really, really wrong. Not just was it not doing correct reasoning, but it's hallucinating all kinds of things. And so they had said, this thing does scientific reasoning for you. Think of it as a co-author for your paper. So that's the frame, that's the model they presented. And it turned out that it was not doing that. It was in fact adding all kinds of bogus stuff. It was a complete disaster. So they had to withdraw it after 3 days. 3 days. That was not a great, so they just gave up on that effort completely, right? So it's one of those things you have to be careful when you put out your product to not oversell it. If anything, undersell it. Do not overpromise. So the other thing you're seeing a lot of, we're going to talk about image generation in just a couple days. But it's obviously very straightforward to use image gen like image gen systems or Midjourney or something like that. And not long after Midjourney came online, this book came out. Exodus, where the story is by an author named Steve Coulson, and all the imagery done in a graphics art style, graphic magazine cartoon style, was generated by Midjourney. So now, of course, without too much trouble, you could write a little piece of Python code to create 10,000 books just like this, right? Question for us, do we want that? So from our HCI perspective, what do we need to think about here? This is your opportunity to raise your hand and say, Dan, I think we need to think about what? What would you suggest? What are some topics of concern? Anything?
The amount of data
The amount of data.
rather than a quality rather than quantity.
Yes. Okay, data quality versus quantity. Another version of that is that you start training on the output of AI systems.
Yeah.
Right? Right. And all of a sudden you get what's called, what we worry about in the field, model collapse, where everything is now trained and you end up training on training and training and training, and you get the whole model basis starts to fall apart. Because there is, when you think about it, a finite amount of data that humans have generated. Right? There's a finite amount of prose or text generated data. And once you've used all that, do you really want to generate more and then train on that, or what? So that's a good one, the model collapse problem. Anybody else have any other worries?
Maybe copyright issues?
Copyright issues, yeah, we're going to talk about that explicitly next time. But as Stephen said, one of the things that's interesting is that most, I would say 99.9% of all the text generated by large language models is novel. I've checked a lot of the stuff that's generated, and I've never found a collision. On the other hand, you can do a jailbreaking, extract data, private data, for example, by using the appropriate prompt, but you have to really go looking for it. It doesn't happen naturally. And one of the big surprises for me when I went to Google was learning that how novel prose is, even on short sentences. So if you type in a new random sentence, the chances are very, very good that even a 4 or 5 word sentence has never been seen before by any of the Google scanners. So that's astonishing to me. I always thought, if you say something like, see the cat, trust me, it's been used, right? But once you start to get to 5 words, it starts to become novel very quickly. So the combinatorics of language are astounding. So copyright's a good one, model collapse is another one. Anything else? It's after 9 o'clock, you've all had coffee. All right, anything else? Okay, we will come back to this. Actually, before we do that, I have a recommendation. So one of the things that Stephen had said, and we had a little discussion in the video, was it's really easy to write something or to have ChatGPT write it for you and then lose track that it was AI generated and not you generated, not person generated. Here's the trick I use when I do that, when I'm, say, writing a paper or working on my book. What I will do is copy the text that's ChatGPT generated into my notes, but I color it all a particular color. It's all red. And it stays red until I completely and totally rewrite the ideas. It's a way of tracking that it's AI generated stuff. Do not copy paste this into your paper, right? So it's a simple, stupid, dumb provenance tracking trick, but I highly recommend you adopt something like that. It doesn't have to be red. You can use your own color. But something it stays visibly marked as AI generated and not human created. Yeah.
For AI generated text, if we put copy and paste this back to the AI, do I know it's AI generated?
Oh, yeah, the question is, if you copy paste AI generated text back into the AI, does it know it's AI generated? Good question. No. There are lots of claims that there are AI prose, AI prose detectors. And if you ask ChatGPT, is this text AI generated, it will give you an answer. It's a random answer. It's a totally random answer. Almost every AI text generator detector I've seen fails badly. And people who believe them have gotten into a lot of trouble. So this is a constant cat versus mouse game. The cat, gets a new technology, the mouse gets a new technology, go back and forth, back and forth. And currently, even though Google claims that they have watermarked some of their prose, I don't believe it. Well, I believe they've done it. I don't believe that it will survive a rewrite, right? So for example, a great suggestion, I won't attribute this to you, but would be to take your ChatGPT output and say to Gemini, hey, please rewrite this. The watermarking will not survive the rewrite. Just won't. So there's a very easy workaround for those. So I just don't believe that the text watermarking is going to work. Okay. So provenance is a good thing to track. Here's a book recommendation, in addition to the two articles I mentioned earlier. This is called Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick, and he's a very well-known writer in this area. In fact, I highly recommend that you follow him on LinkedIn or your favorite social media, because he's got lots of good comments about things. And this book that just came out last year is all about how to be thinking about AI as a collaborator, as a co-intelligence working with you to get things done. So he talks a lot about writing code with these things, but also about writing prose with these things. And he's the guy who brought up the idea of the jagged frontier of AI. So you will hear that phrase. And it comes from this book where he said, it's often hard for people to know when AI is good or bad at something because AI is weird. It creates a jagged frontier of capabilities. Meaning it's really good at something, and then the next adjacent task it's terrible at. And so you get this really jagged performance metric. So the key idea of the book is thinking about AI as a co-intelligence that works with you. So a couple of things I want you to take away from this whole class. There's notions about authorship. So as Stephen said, authorship, meaning you writing text for this class or for anything else in life, you have to disclose that you used an AI to help. Okay, that's the transparency and disclosure part. Currently, an AI cannot be a co-author. This has been tested. In fact, in 2021, that's the first time I saw an AI listed as a co-author on a scientific paper and is rejected. I mean, they didn't get it co-listed, so forget it. You have to disclose that, though. You may not list the AI as an author, but you can say it helped and say exactly how. So in particular, you can't just copy-paste your AI-generated text. That's plagiarism, right? You're taking the ideas straight out of the AI's mouth. So your job is to make sure that whatever you end up turning in, either in a classroom setting or in a work setting or in a public writing setting, that you identify what's what and who generated what. So as Andrea said the other week, you have to be careful when you're using AI writing systems about intellectual property and private data. There are jailbreak ways to get private data back out of an AI system. And you don't want to be the person who is responsible for putting it in the first place, right? So be careful about that. And of course, do not use AI systems to fabricate data, misrepresent sources, or generate content. So it's one of these things where it's easy to do it very, very carefully. And in particular, as I just said, check every single damn reference. It will just make stuff up and you'll be in trouble. So what can you do? That's the warning. Here's what you should be thinking about. AI systems are great for brainstorming and idea generation. If you can't think of something, AI is really your friend. Just ask it for ideas. What could I do for a final project for Dan Russell's class? Right? You give it some framing. You've got gobs of slides here. You might say, I'm just saying, You could, for example, take all the text of all the slides and pour it into your AI system and say, given this, what's an easy project I could do in 1 week with a collaborator? Just an idea. Outlining and structuring, AI systems are really great at that. For example, giving a body of text and summarizing it or creating an outline. Literature review is great. However, note this thing. You must critically evaluate the sources yourself. Like I said, I've seen all kinds of generated things that are just wrong. Drafting, as Stephen mentioned, taking a draft, your crappy text, and putting it into your AI system and saying, could you please rewrite this for clarity and structure? It will often really give you back something very, very nice. That's still not your prose. You still have to go through it and edit it. Right? So, proofreading, actually, grammar, spelling, and all that stuff is pretty good. One thing that a lot of beginning young writers have is a problem of word reuse. So Stephen gave this example of the word momentous. He loves to use the word momentous. You can ask your AI systems, here's a body of prose, here's a paper I wrote. Are there any words that I overuse? And if it says no, then you're done, right? Great. But it will often, I do this myself. I will find words or phrases that I've reused multiple times. Okay. And so one key trick here is to say, here's a block of prose I wrote, check for word overuse, surround the overused words with angle brackets. That way it pops out of the prose. Okay. And obviously, the last line there, for non-native English speakers, if you're turning in work in English, or for non-native German speakers like me, I would use something like this to help me rewrite and check for problems in my prose. So, a couple of things here. Writing is one of these things that's very intimate and it's really potent, powerful technology that we have, right? Remember, Plato, the Greek philosopher, thought writing stuff down was a terrible idea. Well, sorry, Plato. A couple thousand years, we've decided, we as a society have invested in this. And so we're now at a cusp of an interesting shift in what it means to write. So as Ethan Mollick says, think about how do you co-create with an AI. You got this very smart person to work with you. How can you best use that in collaboration? We'll talk in the future about copyright issues and what it means to synthesize new kinds of works. And a fundamental question I will leave you with here, just to think about it. I don't know the answer to this. But how valuable is one text if it can be produced by an infinite number of monkeys in a couple of seconds? Or if we can flood the world with millions of slight variants on a message, how valuable is any one of those? This is, I think, a question for all of us. What counts? What's valuable in the creation of prose or the creation of media? So I'm going to, let's start this up, and then I'm going to let you work on it for a little bit. And then we'll spend like 4 minutes doing this. And what I'd like you to do is to open up this notebook, and this works really much better on a laptop than on the phone. And so what you should do is to try create some summary about this collection. So I put this collection together for you. Okay. So what I'm going to do. Everybody got it? You're not what? You're not allowed to get this? You don't have permission. Share. Viewers have access to full notebook. You don't have access to the notebook?
Yeah, also.
Like, just go to Notebook LM in general.
Like that?
Yeah.
what I'm trying to get you can't open this one, huh? Oh, have you opened it?
No, you don't have access to view this notebook.
I don't know how to fix this. Viewers have access to full notebook.
Oh, no, it's not there.
Huh.
It's not there.
I believe you, but you, this link doesn't work? So nobody sees this, huh?
No, it just is like you don't have access to view this notebook.
Well, this is not my bug. What I would recommend doing, maybe just do this, when you're on your own at home, is create a new notebook. So create new, and then you just drag in a bunch of sources. So you can take PDF files or Word files or whatever. And what I'd like you to do in a couple minutes, maybe after class here, is just test that out and create a summary. Ask it to create a summary. So let me go back and I'll show you what it looks like with this. And so here on the left-hand side this is all of these sources I've put into the system. And this is where I'm working. So I start typing down here, and then you can do various things on this side. So for example, I did this the other day, and this is really interesting. I can say, if you watch, up in the upper right there, I'm going to click on the load to create a conversation. And what this does is it creates a summary of all my sources on the left-hand side. Okay? So this is going to be a conversation between two people talking about an overview of this source set.
Ever make a decision, like a really small one, and then it kind of snowballs into something you never saw coming?
Happens all the time, right?
Like, that's the world we live in, a world full of unintended consequences. And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
We've got a really interesting mix of research papers and excerpts.
Yeah.
So, A, this is pretty awesome. B, this is an example of retrieval augmented generation. So RAG, you've heard this term before. So what I'm doing is I've given it a set to work from. And now if I ask a question down here, like that one, how do policies and innovations create unforeseen and sometimes negative consequences? It's going to work with respect to that set. So that's the retrieval augmented generation part. And it will do a pretty good thing. While that's thinking about it over there, I can add notes over here. I can create a study guide or a briefing document, a timeline or whatever. So these are all standard UI questions that you might think of as a designer when you're building these LLMs. Yes?
Does it create or brings in its own knowledge?
Yes, that's a really good point. Yeah, it's this is called the method is called fine tuning. So retrieval augmented generation basically means here's a bunch of stuff, a collection of sources. Let me drop this in on top of my already pre-trained language model. And so you can think of it as preferring the content in this source set, but it does draw on all the other stuff that's already been pre-trained on. So it's working like this is a layer of knowledge on top of the body of knowledge it already owns. Good point. So what I want you to do is to try this with a set of sources you're working on. For example, ones that you might be using for your final project. Just saying. You could put them in here. You just add over here, blah, 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 blah. Do that. Also, there's a thing to note here. So they just added this recently, and it's quite nice. This discover sources. So given that I've already seeded it with a set of sources that I want to work on, I can say discover, and it will discover new places. So I'm interested in of design. Let's do it HCI. Ugh. It's hard to type standing up for me. Okay, and I will submit that. And so what it's going to start doing is a pull from Google Scholar using that as my sort of framing query. And so you can, now I've actually seen most of these, but you can see all these pretty relevant things. If you're working on a final presentation, this is a great way to find sources. And then you can say, I'm not going to import those, but then you can generate the audio overview. And what I did, this is actually a great study technique. Note, you can say share audio overview. And anybody, so I copy the share link. And this is now, I emailed this to myself or texted it to myself. And now when I clicked on it on the tram ride home, I can listen to this audio. In theory. There we go. Took a while to load.
Ever
And
make
now
a
you can
decision, like a really small one?
Are you wrong?
And we're back.
Ready for our final unintended
We
consequence.
made river blindness.
Okay, so on thesis,
You get the
UC
idea.
dot.
So it's a nice way to export your learning to a more convenient time and place. And these podcasts are quite good. I really do recommend them. All right? Okay, last slide for today. There you go.